So we have some gorgeous winter foliage to have a look at today. And there's lots of choice. There's the wreath, there's the pine cones, the fir tree, and then there's obviously the poinsettia as well. So there's all sorts of choice. So they're really nice. So I kind of consider these to be like we're just doing little studies. And little studies, I think, are really important because it just helps us kind of just get used to the shape and the patterns of things. Um, and every time you do one new thing like that, even if it's a small piece of something, it means that when you come back to it, you're already starting to know about the shape or the way the veins go or the way the berries sit or where the shadows go. So they're really useful in their own right. I mean, obviously this one's a little bit more in detail and that's fine. But yeah, because you just get these repeated patterns in nature all the time. So it is really helpful, even if everything is slightly different and natural. It's just this repetition that's really useful to learn about. Um, Especially with the different types of leaves, because we've got so many fantastic trees and and bushes, haven't we? So, right. So the one thing I am going to have is a bit of tissue. Now you can, or if you want to, use, I'm just finding it in the bottom of my bag. There it is. Some people like, when they're doing things like this, they like to paint on it's like it's the masking fluid, and it was used a lot more than it is, I think, now. Although I think some people do. So it's people like it to put it on sometimes, like say where these little bits are here, so they don't have to avoid going round that. Because with watercolors, we can't layer up the colors because they're more transparent. We have to leave gaps for all of the lighter colors. So you can do that. You can paint that on when we draw the berries and things like that. You can paint it on, and then once it's dry, you've got all your colour on, you can then peel it off and it'll leave that behind. Um, I don't do it for things like this that feel a bit more natural because it can dry in a very angular manner and doesn't, and then all your paint's dried around it. So I just like to drop bits in. And you can go as loose or as detailed as you possibly want with this, because some people will like to really, really go loose and just drop bits and let that water move about with the colour in it. And other people want to be more precise. And I'm just going to say, go with what is really good for you. There is nothing wrong with getting into the detail. I'm going to encourage you to do that if you want to do it. And there's nothing wrong with going loose if you want to really do that. There's so many different styles of watercolour. Um, you can go really thin with your colour to make it more pastel, the whole thing more pastel, or you can really kind of put lots of watercolour up on your brush, which I'll show you a bit in a mile, and make it really vibrant. So um, there's so many ways of doing it. Now, I'll probably go a little bit more vibrant, but I'm going to drop colours in. And you can go really illustrative as well. So there's hardly any, it's kind of, there's hardly any, detail in. So there's lots of little ways of doing it. So with this, I'm just going to pop in and do this as dark as possible. But when you're putting in any pencil work, do yours as lightly as you can, because you'll want to get rid of it you'll want to erase the lines out after, especially if your watercolor is not very thick and you can see through it. Whereas I'm just making mine dark just so that you can see what I'm doing really. So I'm just going to make sure I'm going to pop in a couple of little tips as tips of this holly here, just to make sure I can get it all in where I want it to go. I'm trying to look at how much this leaf takes up of this half before I draw that out. And then I'm going to put the wider area where it comes to here. And that I kind of do this before I'm setting things out, just so that I know it's going to fit. So when I know it's all going to fit, I'm going to get those berries in as well. Then I'll start to kind of get these big leaves in that are coming behind here. And it is your interpretation. It's all of our interpretation. So it doesn't have to be perfect at all. So the other thing with the watercolour is you don't even have to do much drawing. If you want to keep it really loose and you just want to start going in with some brush strokes, that's absolutely fine. You go ahead and do that. But I'm going to go in with a little bit more detail. I'm going to make mine probably, I like to do a bit more, things a bit more in a bit more detail when I've got um, foliage, but probably a lot less detail when I do my landscape. So you can do things however you want, really. I'm just going to get the core bits in. What we're looking at, we're obviously observing all of these different shapes as we go. But what we're going to be looking at really is light and shadow. That I think the watercolor is really helpful for getting some definition between, because the only complaint I think people sometimes have, I know watercolor can be a bit more erratic as well. So there is that. It does tend to go in its own go in its own direction. So even with some, I'll give you some tips to kind of try and avoid it. But even with the best will, sometimes watercolor just behaves erratically because of the nature. It's water, it's water based and it's very watery, and water will shift about. So don't worry if you find that that's happening. It's often not something that you've done. It just does it sometimes. Even watercolor artists that I know say that even there sometimes it's 50-50 whether it works out or not, and that kind of says a lot about it, really. But it's a lovely, you can push the watercolor around, which I love that, and I know I always say that, but it's very true. You can just push it around. It's really nice. So I'm not putting masses of detail into this branch. I'm just kind of getting it into place, really. So I'll probably shift it anyway. Um, And then the same again with this. So I'm like looking at this, takes up quite a big space, doesn't it, of that there? It's a real kind of big corner. That one's almost off the edge. Well, it is where I have, because I've covered some of mine up with the tape at the end, I think, as well. So just go in just best you can. And this bit doesn't have to be perfect, by the way, either. Every curve that you do is a step towards knowing the shape and movement of something you may never have painted before. So it's all really good practice on this journey that we're taking. And it is just a series of little marks, really, overall. We just need a sense that it's feeling. What we want is just a sense that there is holly and it moves in a certain way, and you get like the veins in a certain way. And that's what we're after, really. Just capturing the essence of the lovely holly. So I can see now that my holly leaf up here, the spike is in a different place. But again, I'm not going to worry about it too much, really. Things shift a bit, it's fine. Yeah, there's a big gap between mine as well. There you go. It's fine though. I'm not worrying about it. There we are. And I'm going to pop in these lovely berries. I suppose the only thing is like some of the berries might be slightly bigger because they're at the front. And then they're all going to be slightly different size anyway, aren't they? Like this one at the front's quite feels yeah, just press. So yes, we're just popping in these berries, just having a little look at the shape of them. And we can put some of the shape in with the shadows and things anyway. So some berries over this side. I've got a huge gap between a huge gap between these ones today. That's fine though. It happens to all of us sometimes. I think it's that one actually, because that one, this one isn't far off the size of that one. It's almost like that one needs to come out a little bit further. We'll just leave it there. I shall just not worry. Um, so that's all I'm going to put on mine. I'm not going to put anything else on because I want to do the rest with the pencil and the watercolour, and kind of, get it dropped in and things like that. So the biggest difference with watercolour in comparison to what we've been doing for the last 2 weeks is that we need to work in the reverse way to how we work with pastels and acrylics, and that's because they will layer up and we can put the lightest on top. But with watercolor we can't, because we can't put even like a white over the top of any other colors. It's not going to work. So what we have to do is, if we've got anything that's very light, we'll start by putting those shades in around it. And either if it is white, then we completely leave space in there, and that's the hardest thing. So what you can do is just get a bit of pitch and roll and just put, while your water's clean, just kind of soak it in water, because what we'll do, and then squeeze the excess out. So you don't want it dripping, but you need it in water, because what we can do is, as we're working, if you suddenly think, oh no, I've gone over the light area, we just dab that on and soak up the paint and then take it off. And actually, when it's scrunched up, it gives a more natural feel. So you do get these light curves. So a lot of people work by removal of the paper, of the holly paint, sorry, not holly. Um, and do it like that. Now, if you wanted to put a little bit of a background in, which some people might want to pop in, just have a nice light, what we call a nice light wash. So you can do all sorts with a wash. So it's thinking about which colours you want in. So I'm not going to do anything on the background with the watercolour pencils. I'm going to use the watercolour pencils to kind of get into some of the little details and things. What I am going to do is use, these are a pan. So this is a difference. These are a pan watercolour, which means, sorry, they're not, they're a tube. This is a tube watercolour, so that means we can squeeze some out and use it. So I've kind of just put some colours here or on the other side with my tin, and then I can use those colours like that. And then really a pan is just where you've got them in there. You just might need to, you're doing a large wash, you might just need to get lots of that colour mixed up on your palette. So I'll probably swap between the two just with my colours. So it's thinking, if you're doing a light wash behind, what colour do you want that to be? You can choose any. Just see if I can get my rubber to rub that out. So erase the line going through the middle. Now, if you've got your watercolour paper taped to something, it won't, it's less likely to buckle. And also if it's a thicker paper, it's less likely to kind of soak. Sometimes they get a little bit warped when they've got a lot of water on if they're a bit thinner. But again, it's trial and error and getting used to the paper and everything. So with a wash at the back, it's the same thing applies. You might want to, I've got my kitchen roll handy here as well. I'm just going to kind of get that behind where I come up to more or less where I am and not worry if it goes on the edges too much. But so I'll just lift it straight back out again with a bit of tissue. So what I'm going to think about is getting just the colour. You could do, you can use a similar tone to what one that's here, like experimenting with a different green or a different red or something along the similar. We call it a restricted palette where you're using similar tones. You can use a contrasting one. So where we've got these kind of like warmer colours, you could go in with some cooler colours. Or just go for what you fancy. A lot of it's just the joyful side of it. So I'm going to go for Payne's Grey. Now, if it's a big washy background, I am getting a big glossy brush. Now I've got a bit of Payne's Grey here, which is very dark actually that. So I will really need to kind of bring, and this is why I've got my paper just to test it. I've gone just for this greyish colour, and then what I'll do is I'll mixed up loads once you've tested it, because sometimes when you mix it, it looks darker, which is why testing the colours before you do it is a really good idea. Now I've got this big watercolour washy brush, but you can have any flat brush or a really big round brush, and you can just drag that paint on its side. So I'll just show you on there. So I'd load that, and then you can just make sure it's got a bit more on. You can then, bring that, use the point to get it into where you want to as well. So, a lot of this is exploring with what brushes you feel most comfortable using, really. So I'm going to go in with this one. Now you can tilt your paper as well. So, and I can also add more water as I'm going to my, paper palette that's already in. Now you could also explore, wetting your paper first and then dropping in colour in the bits that you want to as well. It stops you, because this is very wet, it should stop it drying quickly unless you're in a really hot space, and in which case you need to work quite quickly, because what happens is we can get, like, look, you can end up with cauliflower lines where one lot of paint dries quite quickly. And then you go in and you think, oh gosh, what's happening here? Because I've tried to put some more on around it, and then the two lines overlap. So what we're trying to do is work quickly enough so we end up with a seamless colour, basically the wash colour that's not got any joined lines in it. But yeah, so it can overlap and sometimes. But you don't even have to put a wash on. You don't have to put on anything at all. So if you found it's gone in somewhere you don't want it to, I think it was a bit on one of these. There it is, that point there. Go in quickly with your bit of tissue and just lift it out straight away. And you'll find, whilst it is still damp, you can then, as long as you're not going in with an opposite colour. So if we put, say, yellow down and we wanted to add a blue splodges into the background, then we'd end up with a green sky, because it will mix, because it's so much more watery than anything else. So so that will cause grey and muddy to be grey and muddy. So that's what we've got to kind of avoid, really. But you can use a completely plain background with nothing in there at all as well. So just keep moving this around. Now, if you're in a cold room, you sometimes have the opposite problem, which is it doesn't dry. It's not drying fast enough, so you've got to be a bit more patient and let things dry. So I'm trying to move this because I've gone back in, look over there. Keep it moving. There's a bit on the edge here, so I'm just going to get that out with my tissue. Tissues are fantastic in watercolour. I suppose because I've got curves, I probably would be better actually going in, just swap over, going in with the point, so then I can just push it in. And you can turn your paper around as well. I can't do that when it's stuck, but you can always turn your paper to keep that move, keep that point moving in. Now getting to the point here where I've just gone all over the edges of these, but it's okay. I'm just going to lift that out quickly where it's gone over the edge. And then what you can do whilst it's still damp is if you want to, drop in any, so what I'm doing here is I'm just using the same colour. Just going to test what happens. You see that it just drops in. So this is why it's quite happy to test. I'm not going to go in with such an intense colour, so I'm going to water that down a bit more. Let's see what it does. But sometimes you can get just a really nice little like washy effect. I'm going to add a little bit more water to that, and I'm just going to drop in just in some of the areas. Like I think I'll drop it in the, sometimes it's quite nice to drop them in the corner. If it's dried out too much to drop anything in, you can always just dampen the edge slightly. So I'm just seeing what that's like, just dropping a slightly darker colour in just to make that background a bit interesting. And because I'm working in a similar tone, it's not too bad. Okay, and that's all I'm going to pop in. That's it. The other thing you can do is if you have any, let me get it. You can drop salt, like just normal table salt or rock salt, whatever you've got to hand really. When it's really damp, you can just drop in a few little bits of salt, and it just kind of pulls the paint here, there, and everywhere. It's quite interesting texture, but you'll have to do it whilst it's quite damp, otherwise it won't work. And then don't tip it off until at least the end of the night. And sometimes you can leave it in a bit longer if you want. I only seem to be a bit temporary with mine. By the end of the evening, I'll have thrown mine off. So but yeah, you can leave it on overnight and it soaks it up and just makes an interesting pattern. So that's something else you can try. Imagine if this was on a Christmas card or something, it'd be really interesting, wouldn't it, to just get some nice things going on there. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm just going to flip over to, I'm going to get my watercolour pencils out. So I'm just going to demonstrate on this little bit over here what, kind of how you can use the watercolor pencils alongside the watercolors. You could do the whole thing in watercolor pencils, or you can do a combination of different things. So, for example, they're quite handy for doing, if you've got some fine lines and things like that that you want to do. But you might not have the right tools. So for example, if I wanted to kind of put these lines in first, and what I'm going to do first of all, because a lot of watercolor pencil when we use them is to do with pressure. So actually I'll go in with this dark one, but I've only got these two pencils in green. I'm going to test, test before I actually try and colour anything. Just get a nice kind of even blend, you can go into the grain of your paper, and I'm going to do it really lightly as well. So pressure has a lot going to do with the watercolour. This is quite handy because I need it to dry a little bit anyway, otherwise it's going to, it might spread out a little bit. So I've got a light pressure and a dark and a heavy pressure. And then I'm just going to go in with a pencil, watercolour brush, and I'm just going to work in like that. So a lot of people think you need to dip these in, but it kind of just disintegrates the end and it goes on very heavy. So if you actually sketch them in and then do the dark one, you'll start to see with your own watercolour pencils how much pressure you need to apply to get to get the effect that you want. Now you can also layer up. So I'm kind of thinking, well, I want it a bit lighter. I don't want it too vibrant because I'm thinking about these veins. And when I'm looking at these, like the veins on the outside, etc., it looks quite limey green. That's very yellowy green. So I'm going to go in. I've got this colour as well. Let's see. And this is just part of the testing process because they never come out like you think they're going to do. So that's fairly near, I would say. But you could also layer up two colours. So once you've decided on your pressure, you could put on a little bit of that and then, a bit more pressure perhaps with another one. And it's just testing it out first, so and then, deciding, are you getting a nearer green to the ones you had? I can make both light and then see what happens as well. But it's lovely. The process actually is very enjoyable as well using pencils because you can just kind of sketch everything in, and then we'd work the same way in that we'd get the light things in first. So, but the light, we'd put it all in, and then you would just work on the light bits first, let it dry a little bit, and then work on the next colour and everything. So you can have a bit more control. So you would easily avoid these little marks here in the middle, for example, on these very light areas. You can avoid it easier than with a brush. It just easy to kind of go around. So, for example, if I was going to go in with the vein here down the middle, I could do it with a pencil if I wanted to. I'm just kind of looking at the way all of those veins are working. And just put, just a little, make them wiggle or whatever. And then I can go round, just run my pencil, just run my paintbrush over the top. If you want to do it like that. Or you don't even have to. You don't even have to go in and wet these watercolour pencils if you don't want to. The marks, you can leave them as they are. Okay. And the same, when you're doing things like the berries, they'd be quite handy to do in the watercolour pencil because you will definitely get around that quite easily. But I'm going to demonstrate that bit afterwards. So, and that's it. That's really, it's a whole kind of experimental session just with the watercolour pencil. So, if you really feel you want to do that, absolutely go for it and see. It lends itself nicely to it. This does. So when we're building up the leaves on here, I may actually just stick with this to be fair. I think because I found a colour I like. So I'm going to get these ones in as well. Also looking at the edges of them. So it's quite yellowy green on the edge. Now, if your outside edge is still very like wet, it might kind of run in a little bit. So you've got to just make the decision whether it's okay. And some people like the colours to bleed a little bit outside as well. Just got to go with what feels right really with it. You know, some people will go really, really make it all bleed and it looks really lovely and washy. And some people will put the detail in and that looks really lovely as well. So it's just a different kind. So this side here, I can't really see any of that vein because I've got a lot of lightness, so I'm not going to put anything in there. You can just work your way through. That's quite light, so I'm going to start the vein down here on this colour. You know, and you can make these lines a little bit contoured so it feels like you're creating a little bit of shape with them.
Becca, can I ask a question, please?
Yeah, so I'm just working through, but you can obviously, so the other thing, you don't have to just use a, oops, lazy. You don't have to just use your pencil. If you want to try and get some nice little lines with coming down, so you're not having to do this with a point and like tiny little edge at a time. Sometimes you get an inconsistent line down. You can use the rigger brush, which is what I was talking about. And it's about this one's probably only just 3/4 of an inch, or maybe even not quite that actually. But you can get quite even longer ones. And then you wet it so it goes into a real point, and then literally just roll it in the paint like that. You can practice it on if you hold it right at the end and just let it drag through, you get the lovely fine lines. So I'm just going to add a bit of yellow though to that because I've got a very, very greeny, a little bit too acidic for me that. I'm going to mix up that one. I'll just get my other brush to mix. Okay, I'll just roll that in my, just as I was just mentioning. And then, you know, you can just drag, get these nice clean lines basically, you know, even at the edge of something. They're very easy to move the paint around, very easy indeed, which is why the people like them, even like these tips and things like that. Because you just have more control, you know, you can just kind of swoop it round. And a lot of it just depends on if you prefer it to use a brush as a pencil. Some people really love to use a pencil more, other people lean towards a brush. They're all interesting. The great thing about something like a watercolor pencil is that you can take them anywhere with you. You don't necessarily need the water because you can actually draw something and, you know, while you're out and about and put the water on when you come back. So they're great just to take with you in that respect. I'm just getting these right edges. I'm seeing it. Oops, covered it up. Yeah. So just working your way through. This one's got a little bit more of a curve on it. And that's the thing with a rigger, you can just pull around the shapes like that. Just make these kind of soft lines in there. You know, you could always use the masking fluid to do the veins and things if you wanted. Um, that's not a problem because they are quite straight, aren't they? And it's one of those things, some people really like the masking fluid because they don't want to be thinking about where to put things, and other people find it a really laborious thing to do because you have to wait for it to dry, and then and then you have to do this, and then it's not till the end that it's a reveal. So there's fors and against everything. Um, if you want to try it, there's nothing to stop you having a go with that. Okay, so it's just now kind of building up the colours you've got and deciding, if you're doing something light coloured, is it actually going to be white? Are you going to leave it completely, um, or is it a slight tone now? And this is a difficulty because this is what I'll tell you what the pitfalls can be about this. For example, a couple of people tried a shade they thought that might be this morning and then realised when they did it that there wasn't enough contrast between the light and the dark, and so the leaf wasn't curling, because the light bits like that do help it curl. So if in doubt, go lighter, because you can always darken it later at a later stage. That's not the problem. So you could try really, really watering down a green that you've got, like really watering it down. So something like that. So it's only, so it's just marginally shows through, or even more, making it even more watering. That I think I'll try and water it down even more. So I'm just going to go in with something that's quite translucent here. But if I do think anywhere is very bright like there, I'm just going to leave it. So I'm going to go in with this now. Yeah, you see, I'm looking now and thinking it's even lighter than that. So I'm going to make it even thinner. Where these light bits are, just going to go in completely. And this is where you can just, if you're thinking, no, I want it even lighter, just lift it out a bit or even tap it a bit. You can tap it along. But we need to work light to dark because otherwise we won't be able to pop these in afterwards. That's the thing. And it's fine if that happens, don't worry about it. It's a good learning curve actually, because we're like, yeah, I should have maybe not put that in. But what you need is a contrast between your light ones and your dark ones, whatever that might be. So it's quite light here. And you might get to it and think, you know what? I'm going to go even lighter within that. So you can come in and lift out any of the bits where you think it's particularly light. But the great thing is you can get this really very, very translucent colour. Just dropping those in. Now, depending on how watery that is, will depend as well, a little bit there, on when you're going to add like the other tones of colour as well. I think it's quite a process is a watercolour. But as I said, I mean, it's lovely because it's very watery and you can push that paint all the way about just with the tip of your brush, get some lovely effects that way. In the middle of that and make it lighter. It also depends on the colour of your paper as well. Sometimes if you've got a Um, I lost my train of thought there, so I just got so absorbed. This is the truth, isn't it, about art when we can't think and sometimes when we're really focusing. So just working your way through the really light sections, you can start dropping those other colours in. All the little ones, things like this, just remembering to do it. But again, like I said, we can lift colour out and things like that. Nothing's going to stop us doing that. We just, for some people, that's the easiest process is to lift it out as they're going. Yeah. And then start to think about some of the other tones in there. Have you got is there any part of it that's yellowy, like a little bit here? We'll end up with a very dark one in the darkest places and that tends to be where, you get the shadow, like where it folds down or whether it's kind of a bit of a deeper bit of the leaf or whatever, in the folds. But it's thinking about each leaf, the other colour. So I'm going to bring a few other warmish ones in here. So when I say warmish, more of a yellow green. I'm going to bring my other set out actually for that. Um, in there. This isn't a really old set, I love it. But it's got a few different greens. So you'll see that you'll find that there's warm tones of green and that are more yellow based. And then you've got cooler, darker greens, like the hooker's green is a very that's not actually that thing's grey. Um, Hooker's green is a typical one, or you've got your sap greens as well. So just have a little play with them. If you've only got one green, then you can go, and that's absolutely fine because it really helps you with colour mixing. You can go start with one green and add a blue tone to it. So that the sap green is the one that you normally have. You can mix, obviously on your palette, but you can mix in a yellow to get a yellow green, one that's got more, it's kind of warmer. But you can also mix, obviously you do this on your palette, a green, and you can add a blue, like ultramarine blue or something like that. That's there. That's how it is. And make it much darker. So there's ways of just changing the tone ever so slightly that does make a difference. I'm going to test it again. I'm going to go in with this one, I think. So when you've tested a colour and you're quite happy with using that one, and you're wanting to mix up quite a bit, so mix up quite a bit in your palette. You can also, I would maybe mix up your darker one as well. Or, or a couple of greens that you might want to use in there. You can also vary your green by adding something really dark, like you can put brown in it as well, and that makes a dark green. So it's trying out the different greens you've got, and then when you've got mixed a few up, obviously the biggest thing people sometimes find is that they've not mixed. I'll just turn that around so it's getting stuck on the paint. Is mixing up enough, mixing up plenty, because if you're doing like large areas. So when we go in back in with the watercolor paper, you're just kind of dropping things in. Now, some people like that to run and kind of move about, and other people don't. So you've just got to, again, it's trial and error. Just start with what you're wanting to do and let things, if it's slightly damp, you might want it to run in a little bit, but you're still trying to, maybe avoid any of your lighter areas, just moving that about. It's lovely. It's a really nice process, actually. I'll just do a tiny bit more and then I'm going to come back to and have a chat with everybody. Just get underway a little bit with this so we can make a start here. So I'm going in with this kind of warmer green in here. And then down this side, just put some slightly different tones down this side. Now mine's still quite damp. Now the beauty of holly leaves actually is you can start to drop bits of paint in on, and it keeps a bit separate because of the little areas that we're working in. You can do that. And if you find you're going over those veins, then literally just get a wet brush to start with and just pull the paint back out. And if it's not doing it very easily, you just can get your edge of your tissue and just do it with that, so it'll come back out again. Difficult, it's not showing up quite as easily on here because it's very wet. It'll just take a minute to settle on the camera. But yeah, just work happily, merrily along, just dropping in the tones. Now, obviously, if you're wanting to put the really dark ones in and you want to keep an area lighter, just keep it away a little bit. Otherwise, it'll do this. Look, if I just show you, it will spill into the other bit. That's fine if you don't mind that effect. But if you're wanting to keep any colours clear, just hang on a couple of minutes so it's not quite, so it's just a slightly bit drier. But just enjoy just dropping all of these colours in. I'm working actually here with similar, just dropping in the tones I've already got in similar areas in other bits of the leaf that I've already mixed up, so I don't have to remix them later on. So if I see something that's slightly warmer, I'll pop it in. But yeah, you can get some lovely effects. Or you can just work on one leaf if you find that if it's a little, you think, oh gosh, there's a lot of chopping and changing, then just do that. But just being careful to leave out the little, the other areas that you really wanting to keep nice and light. And then the final thing we do on each leaf is going, with the really dark areas as well after that. So you can get, you can cover a lot of it. And then you can work back over the top of a colour that you've already worked with. Keep dropping in those lovely different colours. That's the enjoyable bit, I think. You keep it nice and loose. You can keep it really accurate. And you just keep going, building up the colours. It's like the other things really in that the other processes in that it does take a bit of time. With something like a landscape, I think you see progress a little bit quicker with watercolour. But yeah, you can just push it around with a tip. If you feel like you're feel as though your brush is too wide, then just go on to a slightly thinner brush. You can chop and change just to get in a bit more detail. Or if you like working loosely, stick with the same brush and see what happens. I've gone to a slightly smaller brush here, and I'm dropping in a slightly darker colour over this side. So I'm observing where I'm seeing these darker areas building up now. Same over here. I'm just going to pop in just a bit more vibrancy down this in here. So it'll be mine's a bit of a mishy mash at the moment, but it needs to just dry out before I keep adding anything else in, otherwise it's just going to continue to run. But you can still, as I said, you can still lift things out. So if you see something and you think, I need it, that's gone too dark, just tap on that damp tissue, nice and don't rub but tap it, and it'll start to lift out a little bit more. Right, I'm going to pause there and see how everyone's getting on. So we can just carry on adding these colours, seeing where it goes, deciding on the kind of brush that you want as well. You can almost as well, like this one, obviously I've gone quite up close here to the vein. You can put a bit more definition back when it's a bit more dry, just by, if I want to, and if you're not wanting to keep it too, if you're wanting it, like it feels like it's not, the blending you're not keen on, you can just pop a bit more definition back through, just by getting a bit of shadow around the lighter areas. Or like here, you can leave more light area around as well. So it's just, it's just as you go, see what happens, see what you're enjoying doing. If you did this another day, it would be completely different. Again, that's the great thing about it. You do end up with lots of lovely tones here. Keep dropping those shadow colours in as well where it's really dark, when you feel it's a good time to. And then, when you're getting with your leaf and you're thinking, oh, I just need to check in, just have a little look at where it gets much darker. And that kind of helps to get the shape into place as well. Because bits that are those bits that are kind of less defined or more defined, we can just drop those in and create a little, and they'll just disappear backwards because the cool dark colours recede. So that's helpful for us to know. The great thing as well is we're learning so many new, taking note of so many tones and colours in here, which is fabulous. Really makes us look. Well, I'm kind of going back into some of the other leaf and just working a little bit into it. You can soften it down as well. If you don't like too many lines, just soften it down as you work and just dab your little bit of tissue in it. There we go. And then I'm trying to get some really dark definition between these leaves because sometimes that helps to separate everything out. Um, to see one from the other somewhere along the line anyway, like these are quite dark in there. And remember, the other thing we've got to consider is that it's your interpretation. We're all going to have completely our own kind of style and brushwork on here, which is great. That's what we want. Just seeing your mark making. Really good. Like that. Sometimes as we go on, we start getting a bit brave, dropping it on as well, don't we? Which is good. Just lifting, I have to work with the lifting out process a lot. It's obviously the way my brain works. And we've all have very different ways of approaching it. It's interesting how these berries, get to create this shadow under them as well on both sides. Which is much darker than some of the other areas. So just keep working the colours in and the shadows. Then you get to a point where you want to, kind of make any areas a bit darker as well. And then if you're not, if you get to a point where you think, actually, I think I'm done, but I'm not sure, then just, you can just stop a minute and just take a bit of a pause because once we put the berries into place as well, you may look at it a little bit differently and think, actually, I don't need to do any, or I want to do this to it, or I want to do that, or I don't. So that's all relevant. I'm going to come back to it because mine is so damp. I can't really make any changes to this or drop any more colours in at the minute 'cause it will just spread. So I'm going to leave that to dry off a bit and then I'll come and darken some of the areas. I'm just going to think about the berries now. So again, just decide, if you're using your watercolour pencils or you're using your paints, it's up to you to do that. But again, if you are using your pencils, you'll want to just give them check out the colours and the pressure, and you might decide whether you want to layer two up or not. See what colours they're going to give you and which you like. So with berries, it's not, I don't think, too complicated. I'm going to use my pencils actually for the berries. It's not, I don't think, too complicated in that you've got an area of light reflection, usually a centre, and then some areas underneath you expect them to be a bit more shadowy, or between the berries where they're casting a shadow on each other. So that's it really. So we can just vary the colour slightly by having one that's a bit darker and one that's a bit lighter. So with the pencils, I can avoid by drawing those two marks in. Now that's the bit you could paint if you wanted to do this. I'd have probably suggested to do that bit earlier, but I'm just going to draw these in these shapes because I want the clear, very reflection. So I'm not going to go into that space. Now, the centres of them are almost, I'm not sure what colour they're, purpley. I'm just going to might put the purple in after actually because it's more, it'll cover more easily. And all we can do is a shape that we think it looks like. There's a little bit there. This berry underneath is much darker, which you would expect because it's in the shadow. So here I can overlap. I'm just going to shade it in. And then a very small amount there, isn't there, of there we go. So I'm going to create some shadow around it. Not shadow, sorry, some colour around it. And again, you can decide how much you want to put on, how bright you want to make these. Now you can, if you want to, leave just a little bit of a light circle around them while you're doing that. You can do that. I might actually have to speed it up by just because, so you can see the demo, speed up a little bit by not colouring these and just using some paint actually, but I'll show you out those top two first ones. So, let's make sure your water's not too muddy. But yeah, so I'm going around those. And then I can just add a little bit of dark over the top. So I've got a very small amount of water on my brush here. I'm not overloading it, because this will happen, which is what I've just done. On into the other bit of light area there. I need to lift that out. I don't think when we get the berries on, it starts to feel like it's changing. Right, I'm just going to use the colour I've got here for my berries. We'll do a test. Quite bright, aren't they? Lovely. And obviously we can get cool berries where it's much more of a colour like alizarin crimson, and we can get the brighter berries where we've got more warmth in. So if you want to warm your red up and make it warm, we just add a bit more yellow. If you want to cool it off, you can add some alizarin crimson if you've got it. And if you haven't got alizarin crimson, that's fine. You can put a little tiny bit of blue in, really small amount. I'm just going to go in now with a just move that paint around with the tip of the brush, which is really nice, isn't it? And you can vary them slightly. If you've seen that one side is a bit brighter than another one, then go in one side with a bit slight brighter colour, a lighter one or a warmer one. And then if you've seen the other side is a slightly different colour, then pop that one in. But it's like anything, like the leaves will start to be feeling like resembling a group of holly leaves. Now you've got a group of them in. It's exactly the same with the berries. You need the whole group in place for it to feel as though, you know, we've got the berries in where we want them. And there's still the little, the little centres to put in. You might finish the berries, you want to think about putting the branch in, and if you're not, that's fine. You just got to be careful you've not got any kind of really dark wet spots underneath your berries, because they may run into and make you red muddy. So that's just something to be a bit aware of. Keep working away at it. Each step, even with the berries that we do, will make a difference as well, because then you can go in, with your little centre when it's dry enough to do so. I'm just going to draw mine in here for a minute with this pencil. That's where watercolour pencils are quite handy sometimes as well. So you just draw it on the very top there. One there. Just about see the bottom one there. But also, you can start to kind of look at see if there's any darker colours underneath that you need to put in. Now you can do that with pencil, or you could do it with paint. Just drop in some little, you know, some little shadows underneath. As I said, you often get the shadows between the berries as well, where one's behind another. Or just at the bottom of one. Or you might just go in with a slightly different colour. It's slightly darker. And that just makes them a little bit more 3D. I've just gone with a little bit of purple on there, but you can just have a think about what colour it is you'd like to use. And then I'm just going to go in with kind of a light sandy colour for it's a bit of ochre colour, just where I'm seeing there's a little bit of a light on there. I'm trying to avoid if there's any kind of reflection coming off around as well. And then we can add in, some little dark areas as well where we're getting a shadow again. Because it's the shadow that does define some of it as well. So I'm trying to get a bit of light, a bit of dark. And again, it'll change again. I'm just dropping in some colour here. And then you can go really dark where you'd expect to see the shadow on one side of a branch, whether it's on the inside or the outside. Sometimes it's on both, just depends on, like this side, would expect to see a bit there because the other hollies will be given a shadow there, but also on the back of the branch we're getting a bit of shadow in there as well, where because it's underneath. It teaches us just by looking at these a lot about light and colours that we use. And then just a much lighter colour, I might even go in a small bit of yellow or something. Just to get that lighter area. And then I would finally, again, just see where if I need to make a stronger contrast. We're always thinking about that. Do I need a stronger one? Or am I happy with that the contrast I've got, whether, there's enough dark and lights to make the shapes of things stand out. So you just decide that as you go. You could use that rubber brush as well for that if you wanted to. I might just take a little tissue and just along that middle bit, see if I can lift a little bit of that colour out. Quite nice because it's textured with a bit of tissue as well, so it lifts it out quite naturally. And then, you can go back to your holly and think, right, across what I've done so far, is there anything else that I want to do? Do I want to change anything like I didn't get to finish as much on here? I think I probably would just go in nice and a bit more darkly. And just define some of these areas a little bit more. You can always as well, get the point off, make the point stand out a little bit. You can look at some of the colours under the berries. Think actually it's really quite dark in there. I need to really darken that area. So there's lots of things that's gone, see that's gone a little bit into that colour. And there's loads of little things we can add as we're going through. I'll just come and take a final pause and see how everybody's getting on. Just going to pop this last dot of shadow in between here. And I'm almost seeing a bit of a rosy red glow in there as well. Personally, that's just what I'm seeing. It's almost like a bit of that red's reflected in there, making this really dark underneath here. And between there, where we'd expect it makes the berries pop when we have that, a much darker shadow between there as well. It makes the berries because warm colours do pop against a dark background, so that's why that will work so well. Right, I'll just take a final pause there. I hope you enjoyed that.